Hi everyone, Macsen here. Welcome to my latest Stellaris guide. I've been planning this one for quite a long time, but with the release of the Banks patch and the Utopia expansion, it's now a really great time to talk about population specialization and citizen rights, which were also added within the aforementioned expansion and patch. But as well as those two topics, I will be covering other topics as well. There is some overlap with things such as traits and empire creation, and also ethics and the new Ascension paths which were added in Utopia. But I will probably be doing follow-up videos, follow-up guides to those topics as well at some point, especially if this video does well. The last guide video I did was on early play, and yeah, that did quite well, so it's getting a bit out of date, but I would recommend you check it out at some point. Right, back on topic then. So citizen rights. You can actually see the new citizen rights table here for this race which I have created. The citizen rights table allows you to specialize the species found within your empire to give them certain tasks or certain roles that they happen to be best at. And they happen to be best at certain tasks or roles because each and every species found within your empire, or the game in fact, will have certain traits, as we can see here. The first race here is one I've created, and this species is very good when it comes to generation of energy, and they also have leader tasks. So for rights for them, allowing them to have full citizenship would be a pretty good idea, because that allows them to be leaders, such as governors, rulers, scientists. You might also want to give them full military access, where those leadership traits will allow them to make good admirals or generals. And also, because of the energy traits, you want them to be free as well, because they are generating money. And if you enslave a populace that is on a tile that generates money, then it won't produce as much, basically, as much energy, I should say, rather than money. Whereas, if you had a species with different traits, such as this one here, they happen to be proles, so they are good when it comes to generation of minerals and food, but poor at sciences, and also they are strong, so they get army damage and minerals. If you come into the citizen rights here, they would make a much better slave than a full citizen, or a free citizen I should say. So you may want to enslave them if your ethics allow. Generally, I believe it is the xenophobic and also the authoritarian ethics that allow slavery. There are a variety of different slave types that you can actually have within Banks and Utopia as well though. So in this case, they'd probably be best as chattel slaves, because they generate extra food and minerals, which we've seen from the prole trait earlier. They do actually give food minerals as well. Or you could perhaps make them battle thralls, since they are strong and get a combat bonus, so they would be pretty good in armies. But since this race doesn't have leadership traits, you probably wouldn't want them as a leader, unlike the first race, so that's another reason why you wouldn't want to give them perhaps full citizenship within certain empires that allow you to not use full citizenship. If you're in a xenophile empire, then that's not so easily done. You would often have to give full citizenship to certain species. But there's a huge variety of things that you can do now with this new rights system. It's not just specific roles, it's also whether or not the populace can migrate or colonize or breed even. And there's even purge options that have been added as well for the types of species that you just don't want in your empire. The living standards option found within the citizens' rights is a bit different to many of the other options, and it probably deserves a bit of time to be discussed on its own. So what this is basically your empire devoting some of its material wealth, some of its production, to consumer goods, to keeping your species found within your empire happy. Now, what you would want to do with this is basically, in the main, keep the freer citizens very happy, at least long term. Short term you may not, because you may have a lack of minerals. That's a reason to decrease it and lower happiness. But longer term you may want to even get up to utopian abundance with your freer citizens, since happiness boosts increase the yield output of certain tiles. Whereas other types of populace, you may want to keep the living standards lower. So slaves really don't need so much consumer goods. It will mean that they're unhappy and that causes more unrest. But there are ways of getting around unrest by making extra armies, defensive armies on your planets. For instance, we can see some here, and if I go on to this here, you can see the armies lowers the unrest, but there's always the risk of slaves rebelling. There is actual options though in the newly added traditions that can help with that. Here it is, the greater good, so that's unrest reduced by 20 for example. And I even think there's a new civic added in here somewhere which lowers, here we go, unrest as well. So there's a variety of ways that you can keep low levels of living standards or consumer goods via rights, should you wish. The biggest determining factor about what rights you'll be able to assign each and every of your individual species will come down to your empire's ethics. Now, an empire that happens to be xenophile or egalitarian, for instance, will be very different to an empire that is authoritarian or xenophobic. A freer society will not be able to use slaves, or castes even, and also a xenophobic or an authoritarian empire won't be able to give full citizenship to its xeno citizens found within this empire, just its starting race. So this really does have a big impact on population specialization. So population specialization is really the main topic of this video. The citizen rights feature is basically just what allows you to do it. Now, it's actually been always a good idea to specialize your populations in Stellaris via the use of the trait system, but up until now there has been issues. For instance, you could, in an old system, you could have created a scientist type specialized population type and then found that all of your scientists on his sectors were enslaved, because that's what it used to do basically if you happen to play within certain ethic empires. But the new citizen rights system should prevent that, as long as you pick the right option. So on the left here you can see 11 different specializations for all different pop types, and I'm going to be discussing each and every one of those coming up now. Okay, so let's run you through these different population types. Now, depending on the empire ethics that you actually select, you may not want to use all of these, or in fact in some circumstances you may actually want to combine them. Certain of these population types are actually better as free citizens, so things such as full citizen rights or caste system or residency. That's the rights that you would want to use with those, and others are definitely better as slaves. In fact, I'd say the first three are the free citizen types. There happens to be an energy one there and a science one there, and also a leader build, and most of the rest are actually better used as slaves, but you don't necessarily have to. You could of course have a xenophile empire and you wouldn't be able to have slaves, so you would just have to alter these a bit or not use them at all basically. Yeah, not every single one of these population types you'll want to use, as I mentioned, and yeah, you may want to combine them. Now, before I start reading the descriptions of these pop types and going into more details on them, I should mention a bit about the other information here. Now, I would actually recommend that you ignore all of that, and to a certain extent all of the information found here as well. This is just a potential guide for the ethics that you could pick if you wanted to have these population specialization types as your main player race, but actually I wouldn't recommend certain pop types to be your main player race anyway. So yeah, the information found here on some of these you should just ignore, if not all of them. You can basically use all of these pop types pretty much with no matter what ethics type you pick, but in some circumstances you may want to combine them, and I will be mentioning that shortly. The traits, on the other hand, down here, this is very important to each population specialization type. This is a recommendation in one way or another. Some of them are dependent on ethics though. Leader specialization. This population type is focused solely on being the leaders of your society, i.e. rulers, governors, scientists, admirals and generals. To allow this, they must be free, i.e. have full citizenship or be within a caste. Leadership traits are desired, obviously. So for example, you may want to pick venerable or quick learners. There's also talented available, and also there's enduring, which is a lesser version of venerable. There are a ton of ways you can actually increase the lifespan of your leaders and even the skill points found within the game. That's really what you're trying to do with the leader specialization. Try and create an uber race that will have 5 levels of skills very, very quickly, if not immediately, and will last forever. Now, whether or not you will want to use populations in that role alone is debatable. What I would often do is actually combine this leader type with one of these other two who happen to be free citizens as well, or at least are best as free citizens. So let's continue reading on what I've written here anyway. So this pop type does not have tiled yield bonuses. This is if you don't combine it. So you arguably don't want many in your empire, but pop controls and restricting migration on free citizens may not be viable possible. So to restrict the population size of this empire, for example, you may want to pick something like sedentary or slow breeders. And also syncretic evolution is pretty good as well. What that does is give you a subservient race to start, so you would use that to colonize rather than this empire, or species I should say. You just have this species to be the rulers of your society. There's 5 different types. So certain ethics will not allow free Xenos. As such, taking leadership traits for your player race is often a good idea. Yeah, and this population type is a very good idea for your player race, but as I mentioned, I think in many circumstances it's a good idea to combine it with one of these two. If you do combine it, then you won't want to use slow breeders or sedentary probably, especially slow breeders, because that's a really bad trait normally. For instance, the empire which I was using a bit earlier on is a combination of the leader build and the energy population type, and yeah, you can see them in details here, slightly different to that one. I'd say probably the best ethics for this population type are maybe xenophobe and maybe authoritarian. No, I'm not sure about that. You could actually go xenophile though and actually have a species within your empire that is a very good leader type, but it is, I believe, impossible to restrict for other species within a xenophile empire from potentially being leaders. But if this population type in a xenophile empire popped up as a governor or a scientist or whatever, then they would obviously be very good if they had traits like that. Now in each and every circumstance of all of these population types, you can of course genetically modify your traits at some point during the game. There's even an Ascension perk now which allows you to get even more trait points, and that's a very important part to specialize in your population type should you wish to use it. There is of course 2 other Ascension types. There's the Robotic Ascension and also the Psionics Ascension as well, and I'll be discussing all 3 of those a bit more when I go through this list. So the second population specialization type is the Scientist. Now this population specialization is very, very useful. In fact, with most empire types you'll want to use it in some fashion or not. So this pop type should be a non-slave, full, caste or limited citizenship, as slaves are especially weak at science. A focus on science traits is desirable, for instance intelligent traits and also a natural trait. You can have 3 different types. It could be split into 3 subcategories, one for each natural science trait: physics, sociology and engineering. This species should be especially numerous, lots of science tiles, so migration, high growth, no pop controls are usually beneficial. You don't want to reduce their migration often. Happiness, consumer goods are desired for science yield output and less unrest. So you want to keep the happiness up. That's why I've gone for the communal trait here. Now with many of the pop types here, I've actually used non-adaptive. The reason why I've used this is because it basically gives you a couple of extra trait points. It's the only trait that does that. And there are actually many ways that you can increase the habitability later on for your population types anyway. So that's why it's probably one of my most used traits. In this instance, I've gone for weak because we're not going to be using this population type on mineral tiles or in armies, so it's not going to matter that it happens to be weak. And yeah, combining the scientist and the leader role is definitely an option that you could explore. If you happen to take the genetic Ascension as well, I believe there's a really good new perk or trait added. It's called Erudite. So what it does is upgrade the intelligent trait. So you get 20% in science, and also you get an extra leader skill as well. So if this was your player race, for example, that would definitely come in handy with that if you did a combination, certainly, because they'd be better leaders also then. So yeah, that is the scientist population type. So the next specialized population type is the energy build population. They're very similar to the scientist in the fact that they should be a non-slave. They should have full citizenship or be a member of a caste or limited citizenship. As slaves, they will be weak at energy production because there are negative modifiers associated with slavery and energy yields as with science. A focus on energy traits, i.e. thrifty, is what's desired. It's actually the only trait that gives extra energy credits, although there are empire options that can give you extra credits if you really want to focus in that area. This species should be especially numerous, lots of energy tiles, so migration, high growth, no pop controls are usually beneficial. Happiness, consumer goods are desired for high energy yield outputs and less unrest. When it comes to traits, well, I've mentioned thrifty, that's the definite one you want with these, but more happiness, communal is very good. Rapid breeders, since you want a lot of this population type, I do think that's a pretty good trait. Also, if you go down the genetic Ascension line as well, there's a upgrade to rapid breeders. It's called fertile. So what that does is increase the growth to minus 30%, I believe, and also give an extra 5% happiness. That would be a very good path for them as well. And I've gone non-adaptive and weak again. Something which I forgot to mention about the scientists. Now, if you wanted to go down the psionics Ascension path, I believe the psionics path actually gives a bit of a boost, 5% to all of the scientists. So that is a consideration if you want to go psionics Ascension. To be honest, I don't know an awful lot about the psionics route yet. It is more of a quest feature compared to the genetic trait or the robot Ascension option. I wouldn't say psionics is necessarily the best way to go with certain scientist specialization empire types, but yeah, since it gives a bit of extra science boost, it may definitely be an option. Also with the scientist as well, in theory you could split this up into 3 different groups, as I believe it mentions here. So next we move on to the population specialization types that are mainly best used in slave roles. The first is the miner build. This population type is focused on the production of minerals. Empire ethics that allow slavery are thus best for this population type, but of course using slaves does have its drawbacks. Slavery, chattel or caste is preferred to increase yield output. Focus on mineral boosting traits such as industrious and very strong. I think they're the only mineral boosting traits. But you can of course pick Empire bonuses that will boost these in one way or another should you wish. So this population should be numerous, lots of mineral tiles. So migration, high growth, no pop controls are beneficial. Now you're not going to be able to have some of those if you do have them as slaves. So that is a reason to perhaps not go down the xenophobic or authoritarian route. Happiness is desired for mineral yield output if not enslaved. Otherwise, happiness and consumer goods are only beneficial to prevent unrest. Yeah, I don't think you get any boost for happiness whatsoever when you're for tile yields anyway, when a population is enslaved. So that is the minor population type. Now this type is actually very good to be combined with certain other population types, such as the farmer, which is also a very similar role as well, or perhaps even the warrior builds. But I'm going to discuss those two coming up. Okay, so the farmer builds population specialization type is very similar to the miner, as I mentioned. This population type is focused on the production of food, and the details here are pretty much identical to the miner bit, so I won't reread that. Other than the agrarian trait, you may just want to settle for generally useful traits. Ones that come to mind, conformists, or the conservationist trait, which was added in Utopia Banks, which is less consumer goods. They may be useful, for example. Although you could of course combine both of these if you have enough trait points, but if to do that you would maybe have to sacrifice, so it wouldn't be quite as good. Maybe you would have to pick strong instead of very strong to combine agrarian as well, or you could go down the genetic modification ascension route to give you more trait points, so you could manage it to combine both roles. Other than that, what else does it say here? Although food is very important, you may need less of this population compared to other yield focused types. Happiness is desired for food yields output if not enslaved. Otherwise, happiness and consumer goods are only beneficial to prevent unrest. One trait which is actually very good for both of these is also part of the genetic ascension traits. It's nerve stapling, which I can't think of what game that might have been snatched from. Well, I can, it's South Centauri. Basically what nerve stapling does is remove the effects of happiness whatsoever, so it's great for slaves or populations that species that you intend to use as slaves, such as farms and miners often. And also it increases the food and minerals amount. I'm not sure by how much, but I imagine it's 10 to 20%. So that is definitely a good finisher if you go down the genetic line with these population types. So the next population or species specialization is the warrior build. This population type is focused on capturing planets and forming additional planetary defense via army creation. Any traits or bonuses that increase its ground combat abilities are desirable, such as very strong for extra army damage and resilience. There are many different traits found within the game as well which increase army damage, such as the fanatic militarist ethic or militarist ethic, and also there's warrior culture there as well, which should be very good for, well, increasing your army's strength and lowering its upkeep. If empire ethics allow, this population type should be a battle thrall slave type, that is, as the armies will then gain a further bonus. Because this population type isn't focused on resource collection, few are needed, and measures to keep the population small, e.g. traits, non-migration, may be preferable as long as it doesn't cause too much unrest. Yeah, so if you deny them migration and they have to be a free citizen, they wouldn't be happy, for example. The traits that will prevent them from increasing in number are sedentary and slow breeders, which I've used before on the leader trait here, the lone leader specialization. So that is an option that you could go down. What you could do with the warrior build as well is actually combine it with the miner build, because they do actually have pretty similar traits. So they both have very strong, for instance. If you were to combine them though, you definitely wouldn't want those two traits, because you want a lot of miner type population. So this could be a good option, I think, for a free type empire, xenophile, egalitarian, non-slaving basically. So yeah, that could be a good option to combine those. And then you could also have a lot of these on your worlds, so with resilient and very strong everywhere, it would be very, very hard to take your planets in theory. So the next species, population specialization type, is the pet builds. This population type works best when placed on a tile that contains a special build-in, i.e. one that doesn't produce normal yields such as food, minerals, energy, or one of the 3 science types. So in the main that's going to be the unity yields, or nothing at all basically. There aren't any bonuses that you can get in any way to the unity types, I believe, from traits. I'm definitely sure of that. So yeah, that's where I'd recommend you place them. Its main role is to boost the happiness of other populations. This can be achieved through the charismatic trait and indentured servitude, which is a type of slavery. So you're basically using these as pets to boost every single other species on a planet. Since only a small amount of these pops per world will be beneficial, it's probably best to keep their numbers down with pop controls, migration traits, etc. So slow breeders is a good option for their trait to keep the pop numbers down, and to control them with migration, yeah, only certain ethics will be able to do that, and only certain ethics will only be able to have them as slaves in the first place. So you won't always want to use this population type with every empire, as I believe it says coming up. So yeah, resettlement would be very useful. In fact, resettlement's incredibly useful if you want to have a multicultural, many species specialization types within your empire. Some freer ethics empires aren't going to be so easily able to resettle, if at all. So in that circumstance, yeah, with the more freer empires, it's probably best to combine roles much more like the farmer and the miner, or the miner and the warrior, and the free types as well. You may want to combine into 1 or 2 in a free society. Actually, the freer roles in a freer society may be better as individuals more so than a non-free society. Actually, I haven't said that, but the slave types you definitely want to combine in a free society. Xenophile, egalitarian type ethics more so. So basically these are cute sentient house pets and are not a player race. It's best to alter them in game. So what I mean by that is basically if you happen to find a primitive civilization that happens to have the charismatic trait, they would make great house pets, and you may want to conquer them, potentially later on gene alter their traits as well to give them just generally useful things like the aforementioned conformist trait is quite useful, and also the consumerist traits, environmentalist traits I think it is, that's useful. Slow breeders to keep their pop numbers down. What you could do with the pet build actually is combine it with the farmer build if you happen to be a free empire especially. So you could combine basically the charismatic trait and the agrarian trait, which would mean you would use that population type on both food tiles and also on the unity type building tiles as well. There's definitely an option you could go down, but generally this is best used in more xenophobic and possibly authoritarian empires. The next species, specialization population type, is livestock. This pop type is so tasty that not eating them would be morally wrong. They must of course be slaves and livestock for you to be able to designate them, well, as livestock. Presumably the agrarian trait might enhance their tastiness, food yield output. But yeah, I've actually played a bit more since I wrote this. I'm not entirely sure this works actually when you designate them livestock, because certain things like farms, the livestock don't actually use, so I doubt they use the agrarian trait either, but I don't know for 100% certain, so if you happen to find a primitive that has the agrarian traits in your game and you want to conquer them basically, or another species, yeah, you could have them as a livestock, or you could, if agrarian trait doesn't actually work, you could just have them as a type of farmer if you don't already have a farmer within your empire. So, what else is here? Genetic modification could make them absolutely delicious. Yum. So, what I mean by that is the genetic Ascension traits. There's actually a special trait added called Delicious. And what that does, I believe, is add an extra 100% food yield to any species that is being used as livestock. So you can basically forget all about your food problems if you happen to have a lot of this population type, especially if they happen to be delicious. The next species population type is the Undesirables. For whatever reason, this species just doesn't fit within your empire. Perhaps you just can't make use out of their weird combination of traits, or you just find them too ugly to continue existing. There is only one option: purge them. There are a variety of ways to remove the offending species, each has their benefits, but don't expect them to be happy about it, or other empires for that matter. So let's take a look at the citizen rights once again, so we can have a look at the options for the Undesirables. Let's actually pick this option with this rather ugly looking race here. Definitely deserves to die in a horrible way, more than likely. So you can see there's a huge variety of ways you can actually purge different species now added within Utopia, I believe it is. I'm not sure if it's within the Banks patch or just Utopia. So there are, how many is there? 5. There's extermination. Affected pops are systematically eradicated. This is the fastest form of purging available. That's probably going to be the option that most annoys enemy empires, I would imagine. I actually haven't had a chance to test it out yet because, when I'm recording this, Utopia isn't even out actually. Paradox were kind enough to provide me with a Steam key, so I'm able to make this content so it's available when Utopia comes out for public release. Right, next option is neutering. Affected pops no longer grow and will die over time, but gain only a moderate happiness penalty. So if you're worried about unrest, neutering could definitely be the option here. But the downside, in theory, might be that other empires are going to be annoyed at you for longer, because it takes longer to get rid of them, in theory. There's displacement. Affected pops are expelled from our nation over time, left to find refuge outside our borders. Now, I would hope with this that this affects empires other than your own less in terms of relations, but I don't know. So, I'll have to try it out, of course. Then the next option is forced labor. Affected pops are worked to death and can be used to produce food and minerals until their eventual demise. So if you're short on food and minerals, that may be the option to take. Possibly, if this race happened to have industrious or agrarian as well, or strong or very strong, then yeah, that would maybe a good option if you didn't want to keep them but still wanted to, yeah, get rid of them basically and get some labor out of them at the same time. The last option is processing. Affected pops are processed into nutrient-rich food sources, boosting food availability until death. So say for example you wanted to get rid of a nasty ugly race but were low on foods currently, that could definitely be the purge option you should go for. So for the next population specialization type, I'll have to ask you to use your imagination that is a robot. This is the artificial build specialization types, so basically robots, droids and synths. Best used if you want population quick, e.g. to reach a pop threshold to build a capital building, which often would need 5 or 10 population on a planet before you could do it, or to colonize a planet you lack an adaptable species for. Say for example you want to colonize a tomb world, yeah, robots can come in handy for that, Or say, for example, the only species you have at hand colonizes ocean worlds and you want to colonize a jungle, well, or tropical world, yeah, robots you could definitely use. So robots and droids are good at extracting minerals and are okay at extracting food yields. So they make a great stopgap if you lack a better population type, for example a miner or a farmer. Synths, which is the final upgrade to the robots, and it takes a long time to get. It's right at the end of a very long robot's tech path. They are actually excellent when it comes to, well, science and energy. In fact, they may be better energy than normal population types. I think they get 20%, and their thrifty trait is only 15%. So, yeah, synths are actually very good at yeah, a lot of things actually, including minerals and okay at food. The issue with robots though is maintenance, but it is cheaper for materialists now within Banks Utopia. They've actually reduced the maintenance cost there. There are a number of options when it comes to robots and Empire as well. You can start off as a mechanist if you really want robots. There is of course the robot Ascension path as well. I think the robot Ascension path could be very good for certain Empire types. For instance, well, let's go into the edit screen here and go into the Civics, if I can find that there. The Fanatic Purifier is basically, this option is new. It's a whole different way of playing. It's basically an anti-diplomacy type game where everyone hates you, but you get a number of very good bonuses. Robots are going to be very useful in that type of game because you're going to be purging everyone, and since you can get later on are good at everything, that's going to be really good for that type of game. And you may even want to just go down the Ascension path and become a robot yourself, yeah, in that type of game. So the final species specialization type is the adapter. This pop type is for those who lack the patience for terraforming or genetic manipulation or getting any techs in general that will help you colonize more hostile worlds. They just want to colonize everything and anything right now. So they are best used as a player race. The adapter is all about getting off to a quick start. And the key trait with them is extremely adaptive. So normally a planet type, well, say you were started on a continental world. Let's come in here. Any of the wet types. These other two columns would only have a 20% habitability, but with the extreme adaptive traits they would be at least 40%. So you can pretty much colonize everything. You would have to later on maybe get some habitability traits to boost that a bit. You would always have pretty low happiness on those worlds, but it does allow you to colonize them, which is pretty important arguably if you want to deny anyone else from grabbing worlds and want to be able to colonize literally everything straight from the game start. Normally, yeah, you would have to get terraforming abilities or genetically modified species to allow them to colonize in different worlds, or just acquire different species that have different colonizing world specialization types. Ultimately, when terraforming comes in, or the ability to change a species' planet's preference, their value diminishes and you'll find yourself a large amount of non-specialized pops on most of your planets. But for a quick start option, it could definitely be worthwhile. You could, with this population type, go down the robot Ascension route for similar reasons to the Fanatic Purifiers. And there's also actually a genetic Ascension trait that you can actually pick up as well. It's called Robust. So what it does is actually add an extra 10% onto the extremely adaptive trait. And I believe it also gives you an extra 30-year lifespan. So that, yeah, that's definitely very good for a player race. Also, there could be the option of maybe entirely changing all of their traits, which I think it might be possible to do with the genetic modification line. I haven't actually had a chance to try it out yet, but if it is possible to do that, and from the dev diaries it did seem to suggest it. It seems to suggest that you can add and remove negative traits and positive traits, so you could potentially basically change this species into an entirely different race later on. So maybe you could colonize a ton early game and then genetically modify it to perhaps a combination of these races, or just one of those races, or maybe you could have one of the combinations here, like miners and farmers, or just miners, who knows. There's definitely, well, if that is the case, yeah, that could definitely be an interesting strategy to go down with this pop type. Another thing you could actually maybe do with this population type, if I come into here, this is newly added within Utopia. So this is Hive Mind, and it's a very radically different way to play. To be honest, the Hive Mind option probably deserves a whole video to itself to talk about that, but I'll mention a couple of things. It says it cannot follow the psionic or synthetic ascension paths, but it is very well suited to the genetically modified species ability. So yeah, this race could definitely work with that, I think. And yeah, maybe you could start out with this race and, like I mentioned, change them completely to a different pop type later on. The Hive Minds, they don't have happiness, they don't have well, they're immortal, so they don't need extra lifespan. Yeah, they're really kind of strange, but it's a very weird way to play. But it's great that new options have been added, like Hive Mind and Fanatic Purifiers, and I especially like the the syncretic evolution trait as well, so you can start off with slaves. And yeah, this Civics system is actually really great. Adds a ton of new options to all of the government types and makes the game a lot more interesting. It's a small part of a host of huge amount of features added within Banks and Utopia, which yeah, have really improved the game pretty significantly. So that's it for this species population specialization guide, and we covered quite a few overlapping areas as well, quite a bit, like traits and the odd other thing as well. I hope you enjoyed this guide. If you did, please help me out by leaving this video a like. I'm really very grateful for that. The more likes this video gets, the more views, the more encouraged I am to do more content like it for many other topics, like the new traditions that were added in the game, going into the Ascension paths a bit more, and the Ascension perks I could also cover. There's things like ship configurations I could cover. There's all of the ethics I could cover in a different guide. I mean, the list is pretty much endless when it comes to Stellaris. There's so many things I could do guides for. And yeah, it's up to you basically if I do more or not, if this video does well. One way that I would definitely be encouraged to do more content like this is if it results in more people signing up to my Patreon service. Patreon is a service that facilitates people donating money to channels like my own to help keep them going. They do have running costs, of course. It doesn't come free. Updating computers to be able to play the latest games, for example. You do need new graphics cards occasionally, and hard drives and so on. So if you were to check out my Patreon page, and even better, if you were to become a patron of mine, I would be very, very grateful for that. And I'd just like to thank my existing patrons who have been a massive, massive help in helping to keep the channel going for as long as it has. Other than that, if you have any comments or questions, or want to know if I would do certain guide videos on certain topics, that yeah, if it's something you want to see, let me know in the comments basically. Or if you just want to say thanks for the guide or just hi, use the comments. I think that's pretty much it then for this guide video. Apart from the fact I should mention I am planning on doing a let's play for the Utopia expansion and the Banks patch, and I'll probably be using this race here as well. It's got a, well, it's a combination of the leader and the energy population type. And I'm probably going to be using, well, xenophobic and authoritarian traits, and these are the probable options I'm going to use as well. When I was showing the citizen rights bit, I had actually been testing this race out, so that was a brief look at them there. I had started out with a slightly different option with this race, and I changed it because of that test game. I was dictatorial, but I'm going to go for imperial because there's actual new factions found within Utopia. So yeah, I found that dictatorial doesn't actually work as well as imperial when it comes to having these ethics traits in regards to factions. But, well, I can talk more about that in the Let's Play. Right, so that's it then for this video. I'd just like to thank you for watching. Please check out my playlist as well for the other Stellaris guides. There's going to be more coming in future. If you're watching this well into the future, who knows, there could be quite a few in there. As when I'm recording this, there's just that one other guide video concerning how to get off to a quick start. Right, thanks for watching then, and yeah, there should be a link or two in the outro screen here as well for the Let's Play when it's out, and perhaps another other guides. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.